Let me tell you something about corporate loyalty. I've watched countless promising careers crash and burn because people confuse their job title with their identity. Here's the truth. Your value isn't measured by your employee ID. Numa. My name is Reed. I'm sitting in my office, a corner suite with a floor-to-ceiling glass wall that overlooks the entire Port Harding harbor. Dozens of sailboats, their masts like a white picket fence against the steel-blue water, bob gently in their slips. It's a peaceful view, the kind of view a man is supposed to have when he's made it. But the peace I feel today has nothing to do with the view, or the title on my door, or the weight of the company I help run. It comes from a single sheet of paper resting on my desk. It's a letter, printed on heavy, cream-colored bond with the Maritime Solutions corporate letterhead embossed at the top. It's addressed to Prescott Marine, my family's business. In a few minutes, my assistant will seal it in an overnight envelope. Tomorrow it will land on my brother's desk like a declaration of war he never knew was being waged. It's a standard business correspondence, really. A notification of acquisition and a summary of new account terms. But for my family, it will read like an obituary for the life they knew. At the bottom, under the typed title head of Global Logistics, is my signature, my name. The return address is about to become their worst nightmare. They think I'm a failure. For 5 years they've been dining out on the story of poor Reed, the sensitive, impractical son who had a breakdown and vanished after they made the tough but necessary decision to sell our shared vacation home. They're certain I'm living some lonely, diminished life in a dead-end town, probably stocking shelves or washing dishes, haunted by the ghost of my own inadequacy. They don't know that this small coastal town is the global headquarters of the country's largest boating supply company. And they have absolutely no idea that the quiet, forgotten son they wrote off has spent the last 5 years becoming the man who holds the fate of their entire business in the palm of his hand. All future terms of business, the letter explains, will be dictated by me. My family is about to learn that the one they buried is the one who now owns the ground they stand on. The house was called the Anchorage. It wasn't just a structure of wood and nails. It was the repository of every good memory I had from my childhood. My grandfather, a man who smelled of salt and sawdust, built it on a rocky point overlooking the Sound. He built it with his own hands, and he taught me how to use mine. While my older brother Jonathan was inside reading books about economics, I was outside with Grandpa, learning how to splice a rope, how to patch a shingled roof, how to read the tide charts he kept tacked to the wall in the shed. He'd point out at the water and say, "The sea is honest, Reed. It doesn't care about your last name or the money in your pocket. It only respects what you know and what you can do." He saw something in me that the rest of my family never did. When he passed, he left the house to all of us, but I knew, in my heart, that he left its soul to me. I was the one who kept it alive. Every summer I'd spend my vacation time, my own money, replacing rotting deck boards, repainting the shutters that perfect shade of seafoam green, and keeping his old sailboat, the Wanderer, seaworthy. For them it was an asset, a line item on the family balance sheet. For me it was a sanctuary. It was the only place I felt like I truly belonged. The family business, Prescott Marine, was my father's world, and by extension, Jonathan's. It was a successful marina, but it was sterile, all polished chrome and corporate handshakes. It had none of the heart, none of the history, that lived in the weathered wood of the Anchorage. The betrayal came on a gray Sunday in October. They called a family meeting at my parents' house. I walked in, and the mood was thick with a cloying, false solemnity. My father, Richard, a man whose spine had long since been replaced by a checkbook, couldn't meet my eye. My mother, Marion, fluttered around with a tray of iced tea, her anxiety radiating off her in waves. And Jonathan, my brother, sat in our father's favorite armchair like a king on his throne, a smug, predatory stillness in his eyes. My sister Cassie sat beside him, nervously twisting a ring on her finger, always his loyal lieutenant. Jonathan cleared his throat. "Reed," he began, his voice dripping with condescending gravity, "we've had to make a difficult but necessary business decision." I knew immediately. I could feel the floor drop out from under me. "The marina is doing incredibly well," he continued, "but to get to the next level, we need a significant capital infusion to expand our service bays and upgrade the docks. We've explored every option, and the most logical source of that capital is the Anchorage." I just stared at him. The words didn't compute. It was like he had just suggested selling my own arm. Sell the house, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Grandpa's house. It's not just Grandpa's house, Reed. My father chimed in, finally finding his voice. It's a shared asset, and it's underutilized. You're the only one who really goes there anymore. Bear, but by the integrity you bring to work every day. I go there because I'm the only one who takes care of it. I shot back, a hot spike of anger piercing the shock. While you're all counting your money, I'm fixing the roof that's keeping your investment from rotting away. And we appreciate that, we really do, my mother said, placing a placating hand on my arm. I flinched away. But think of the legacy we can build with the marina, a real legacy for the whole family. The anchorage is the legacy, I said, my voice rising. Jonathan sighed, a theatrical display of patience wearing thin. Look, Reed, it's done. We received an incredible all-cash offer from a developer. No contingencies, it closes in 30 days. We've already accepted. The air left my lungs. You accepted, without talking to me. I own a quarter of that house. He leaned forward, the mask of civility dropping away to reveal the cold, hard ambition beneath. And you will get your quarter of the proceeds. But we three, he gestured to himself, Cassie and my father, voted to sell. It's a majority. It's business. You wouldn't understand. That was his favorite line. You wouldn't understand. He'd been saying it to me my whole life. He said it when I chose a liberal arts college over a business degree. He said it when I took a job teaching history instead of joining the marina. He said it every time I chose passion over profit. We've already earmarked the funds for the marina expansion, my father added, as if that would justify the knife he was twisting in my back. This is for the family's future. Cassie finally spoke, her voice small. It's a really good offer, Reed. Life-changing. I looked at their faces, a united front of pragmatic greed. They had discussed it, planned it, and executed it all behind my back. They saw my love for that house not as a virtue but as a liability, a sentimental weakness that stood in the way of their ambition. In that moment, I saw with perfect soul-crushing clarity that I was not truly a part of their family. I was just an obstacle. I didn't argue. I didn't yell or plead. What was the point? They had already made their decision. The people who were supposed to be my closest allies had just sold my heart for a new set of boat slips. A cold, quiet clarity washed over me. The anger didn't vanish. It simply hardened. It morphed from a hot, messy emotion into something solid and heavy in my gut. I stood up. Fine, I said. The word was flat, empty. Jonathan looked surprised. He had been gearing up for a fight, a tantrum. My quiet acquiescence seemed to unnerve him more than any outburst would have. He pulled out a checkbook from his briefcase. We figured your share comes out to this. After fees and taxes, we even rounded it up. For your trouble. He wrote the check and slid it across the polished coffee table. It was an obscene amount of money, but it felt like 30 pieces of silver. It was my price, the price for my memories, for my grandfather's legacy, for my place in the family. I picked it up. I looked at the number, then I looked at my brother, my sister, my mother, and my father. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't say another word. I just folded the check, put it in my pocket, and walked out the door. As I closed it behind me, I heard my mother say, "Well, that went better than I expected." The drive away from my parents' house was a blur. I don't remember the roads I took, but I ended up at the anchorage. It was dusk. The lights were off. I walked down to the small private dock, the one I had rebuilt with my own hands 3 summers ago. The wood was solid under my feet. I sat on the edge and listened to the water lapping against the pilings, a sound that had always been my comfort, but now it felt like a lament. This was the last time, the last sunset I would see from this place. The sale wasn't just about money or a house, it was an amputation. They had cut me out of our shared history, out of our very identity as a family, and they called it business. They had chosen the marina, the symbol of their ambition, over the anchorage, the symbol of our heart, and in doing so, they had shown me exactly what I was worth to them. I didn't stay the night. I couldn't bear to. I drove until the sun came up, the check in my pocket feeling like a lead weight. The next morning, I walked into a bank in a town I didn't know, and cashed it. The teller looked at the amount, and then at me, my rumpled clothes and unshaven face, with suspicion. But the check cleared. The money was real. It was the price of my exile. In the days that followed, my phone buzzed incessantly. calls from my mother, texts from Cassie, filled with hollow apologies, and talk of a new chapter. Jonathan sent a single smug email with the subject line, "Moving Forward," attaching the architectural renderings for the new expanded Prescott Marine Legacy Yacht Club. I deleted it without opening the attachment. I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I methodically dismantled my life. I quit my teaching job. I gave notice on my apartment. I sold my furniture, my car, everything that tied me to that place. I packed 2 duffel bags, threw them in the back of a beat-up truck I bought for cash, and I drove west. I changed my phone number. I deleted my social media profiles. I simply vanished. The first few weeks were a haze of cheap motels and greasy spoon diners. I was adrift, a ghost haunting the interstate highways of America. The silence was deafening. In that silence, the flashbacks came. They weren't gentle, nostalgic things. They were sharp, painful shards of memory that explained how I'd gotten here. I remembered being 10 years old, standing on the dock with Grandpa. He was showing me how to tie a bowline knot. His hands were gnarled and scarred from a lifetime of work, but they moved with a confident grace. Jonathan was sitting on the porch, reading a book. "Pay attention, Reed," Grandpa had said, his voice raspy. "A man who can't tie a good knot can't be trusted with a boat, and a man who can't be trusted with a boat can't be trusted with much of anything." He winked. "Your brother, he's smart with numbers. But you have the sea in your blood. This place, the Anchorage, it's the soul of our family. Don't ever let them trade it for something shiny." He had seen the fault line in our family, even then. The divide between the tangible and the transactional. Then another memory would surface. A family dinner, years later. I was in college. I'd just spent the summer lovingly restoring the Wanderer, sanding her hull down to the bare wood, and giving her a new coat of varnish until she gleamed. I was so proud. I was telling everyone about it when Jonathan scoffed. "While Reed's playing handyman with that old wreck," he announced to the table, "I landed the new account with the regional regatta. I'm making real money for the family business. That's what builds a legacy, not sentimental hobbies." My father had nodded in agreement. "Jonathan's right, son. You need to be more practical. Sentiment doesn't pay the bills." I remember the shame that burned in my cheeks, the feeling of my passion being dismissed as a childish indulgence. They had been underestimating me, devaluing me, for my entire life. The sale of the house wasn't a single act of betrayal. It was the culmination of 1,000 small dismissals. The lowest point came in a town called Port Harding. I had been driving for weeks, just following the coastline south. I checked into a rundown motel that smelled of mildew and regret. I was numb, exhausted, running on fumes. I turned on the small buzzing television, and for some reason, I logged into an old forgotten email account on my laptop. There was a message from a distant cousin, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. The subject was "thinking of you," and the body of the email was filled with platitudes. "Heard about the house, so sorry, hope you're okay. Family is complicated." But then she wrote the line that broke through my numbness. "I saw your mom last week. She said you took it hard, but that it was for the best. She said they're all worried about you, that you're not equipped to handle this kind of disappointment. Jonathan told everyone you had a bit of a breakdown, not equipped." The words echoed in the cheap, stale air of the motel room. They weren't just content with betraying me. They were actively curating the narrative of my failure. They were painting me as the weak, unstable son who couldn't cope with reality, all to justify their own greed. I was the family sacrifice, and now I was being recast as the family lunatic. I clicked on a link in her email signature, a link to her social media page, and there it was. A photo, posted just 2 days before, my father, my mother, Jonathan, and Cassie, all standing on the deck of a large yacht, champagne glasses raised. My brother's arm was around my sister, his face beaming with triumph. The caption read, "To the future. Breaking ground on the new Prescott Marine expansion next week. A legacy for generations to come." Something inside me snapped. It wasn't loud or violent. It was a quiet, cold, definitive break. The hurt, the sadness, the feeling of being lost, it all burned away in an instant, leaving behind something hard and pure, and diamond sharp. It was rage, but a different kind of rage than I had ever felt before. It was focused. It was patient. They had taken my past, so I would take their future. They had written my story for me, casting me as a failure. It was time for me to write my own ending. The next morning, I walked out of that motel and saw the town of Port Harding for the first time. It was a working town, not a tourist town. The air smelled of diesel and fish. The harbor was full of commercial vessels and workboats, not pleasure yachts. I sat down in a small diner by the docks, a place called the Salty Dog. The coffee was thick and black. At the counter, a group of men in work jackets were talking loudly. I couldn't help but overhear. "Another container from Singapore is delayed," one said. "Harrison is going to have a fit. Maritime Solutions is growing too damn fast," another grumbled. "The logistics can't keep up. They need people who actually know how a boat works, not just how a spreadsheet works." Maritime Solutions, the name registered vaguely. I'd seen their trucks on the highway. I pulled out my laptop and did a quick search. My heart started to beat a little faster. Maritime Solutions wasn't just some company, it was the company, the largest distributor of boating and marine supplies in North America. Their global headquarters, the nerve center of their entire operation, was right here, in Port Harding. A plan began to form. It was audacious, insane, and felt more right than anything I had ever considered in my life. My family understood one thing: business, the business of the sea. They had used their business to crush my connection to the sea, so I would use the business of the sea to crush them. They thought I was impractical, sentimental, not equipped. They saw me as a handyman, a hobbyist. They never once considered that the same hands that could restore a boat could also learn to build an empire, or dismantle one. I finished my coffee, paid my bill, and walked out into the crisp salt air. I wasn't adrift anymore. I had a destination. I was going to get a job at Maritime Solutions. I didn't care what it was. I would start at the bottom. I would learn their business from the inside out. I would become the man they never thought I could be. And one day they would understand. Oh, they would understand. My new life began on the floor of Warehouse 3 at the Maritime Solutions Distribution Center. The work was brutal, monotonous, and humbling. For 10 hours a day, I was just a number on a payroll, scanning barcodes, loading pallets, and breathing in the dust of a million different boat parts. The pay was terrible. My apartment was a tiny room above a laundromat, and every muscle in my body ached. It was perfect. The physical exhaustion was a balm. It left no room for the ghosts of the past. It focused me. While my former colleagues were discussing Foucault and the fall of the Roman Empire, I was learning the difference between a stainless steel cleat and a chrome-plated one, memorizing the stock numbers for every size of anchor chain, and understanding the flow of goods from the receiving dock to the shipping bay. I wasn't Reed Prescott, the heartbroken son. I was just Reed, the guy on the night shift. I kept my head down and my mouth shut. I listened. I watched. My family had always mistaken my quiet nature for a lack of intelligence. Here, it was an asset. I saw things others missed. I saw the inefficiencies, the wasted movements, the bottlenecks in the system that cost the company time and money. The pickers in my section were following a route dictated by a computer algorithm that made no logical sense. They were zigzagging across the vast warehouse, their scanners sending them from aisle 3 to aisle 27, and then back to aisle 4. On my own time, in my tiny apartment, surrounded by nautical charts I'd bought at a thrift store, I started mapping the warehouse. I used the same principles of navigation Grandpa had taught me for the sea. I thought about currents and eddies, about the most efficient route between 2 points. I cross-referenced the pick lists with a physical map of the warehouse and designed a new system, a serpentine path that flowed logically from one section to the next. It was simple, intuitive, and I calculated it would cut the average order fulfillment time by at least 15%. I typed up a 2-page proposal, walked into my floor manager's office, and put it on his desk. He was a gruff, overweight man named Mike, who usually just grunted at me. He looked at my proposal, then at me, then back at the proposal. He saw the history teacher on my resume, and probably thought it was a joke, but he was also a man drowning in overtime costs and missed shipping deadlines. "Fine," he grumbled. "Try it with your crew tonight. If it messes things up, you're on cleanup duty for a month." That night, My team finished our entire pick list 2 hours ahead of schedule. There were no errors. By the end of the week, Mike had implemented my system for the entire night shift. By the end of the month, it was the standard for the whole warehouse. 2 months later, a position for warehouse supervisor opened up. Mike called me into his office. "You're not a lifer on the floor, are you, kid?" he asked. I just shook my head. He slid the application across the desk. I got the job. It was my first step up the ladder, and it brought me into a new world, the world of data, and in that world I found my first true ally. David Chen was a young, ferociously intelligent logistics analyst who was a ghost in the corporate machine. He was brilliant with numbers, a savant with spreadsheets and predictive models, but he had the social skills of a sea urchin. His boss, a slick corporate climber named Peterson, took credit for all of David's work and kept him buried in a cubicle, drowning him in raw data streams. I met David in the break room. He was staring at a complex chart on his laptop, muttering to himself about shipping variances. I looked over his shoulder. "The problem isn't your data," I said quietly. "It's the inbound container scheduling from the port of Long Beach. They're not accounting for the union-mandated break times, so your model thinks there's an hour of unloading time that doesn't actually exist." David looked up at me, his eyes wide with shock. No one from the operational side ever talked to the analysts. We were two different species. How did you know that?" he stammered. "I used to unload those containers," I said. "That was the beginning of our partnership. It was a secret alliance at first. I would feed him real-world, on-the-ground information, the kind of practical knowledge that never shows up on a spreadsheet. He, in turn, would run the numbers, building elegant models that proved my instincts were right. He showed me how to read the language of the company, the language of profit and loss, of efficiency and waste. I gave his data a connection to the real world. Together, we were a formidable team. My quiet practicality and his data-driven genius. We started identifying millions of dollars in potential savings, not just in the warehouse, but in the entire domestic supply chain. My ascent became rapid. From warehouse supervisor, I was promoted to regional logistics coordinator for the East Coast. My proposals, now backed by David's flawless data models, were getting noticed higher up the chain. I moved out of the room above the laundromat. I bought a small, respectable condo. I still drove my beat-up truck. I lived simply, banking almost every dollar I made. All my energy, all my focus, was on the work. I was a monk in the temple of logistics. It was about 2.5 years into my career at Maritime Solutions, during my time as regional coordinator, that I finally allowed myself to think about my family. It wasn't out of nostalgia, it was out of curiosity, a cold, clinical curiosity. I now had access to the company's national client database. My heart hammered against my ribs as I typed Prescott Marine into the search field. There they were, a mid-sized account, nothing special. I saw their order history, their payment records, and I saw their primary supplier. They didn't buy directly from us, not for most of their core inventory. They used a regional distributor, a company called Nautical Necessities. It was a classic middleman, a smaller family-owned business, much like my family's marina had once been. This was the moment the vague, formless desire for revenge began to crystallize into a concrete, actionable plan. This was the leverage. This was the path. I didn't just look at Prescott Marine. I started digging into Nautical Necessities. I had David pull their public financial records. What we found was fascinating. They were a company living on the edge. They had recently taken on a massive amount of debt to expand their own warehousing, just before a downturn in the market. Their cash flow was tight, their profit margins were shrinking, and they were dangerously over-leveraged. They were a perfect target for an acquisition. A minnow waiting to be swallowed by a whale like Maritime Solutions. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place a year later. The CEO of Maritime Solutions, a legendary and intimidating man named Marcus Harrison, announced a company-wide innovation challenge. He was looking for bold new ideas to drive the company's growth for the next decade. Peterson, David's boss, was scrambling to put together a glossy, jargon-filled presentation about synergy and optimization. It was meaningless corporate fluff. This was my chance. For 2 months, David and I worked in secret, often late into the night in his cubicle. We built the case. It was a masterpiece of strategy and data. My proposal wasn't just about acquiring a single struggling distributor. It was a comprehensive plan to revolutionize our entire East Coast logistics network. By acquiring Nautical Necessities, we wouldn't just absorb their clients. Like Prescott Marine, we would gain a strategic foothold, eliminate a competitor, and create a new, more efficient distribution hub that would save the company an estimated $50 million over 5 years. The acquisition wasn't the goal, it was the key that unlocked a much larger strategic victory. The day of the presentation, I walked into the main boardroom at the corporate headquarters. It was the first time I had ever been on the executive floor. The room was filled with vice presidents and department heads in expensive suits. Peterson went first, delivering his slick, empty speech. Mr. Harrison looked bored. Then it was my turn. I was just a national logistics manager. Most people in that room didn't even know my name. I was wearing a simple off-the-rack suit that had cost me less than the shoes most of them were wearing. I didn't use a flashy presentation, I just had David's data projected on the screen behind me. I spoke for 20 minutes. I didn't use corporate jargon, I spoke in plain direct language. I talked about shipping routes, warehouse capacity, fuel costs, and supplier redundancies. I laid out the problem, the opportunity, and the solution with cold, irrefutable logic. I knew every number, every detail. I knew it because I had lived it. I had started on the floor. When I was finished, the room was silent. Mr. Harrison, a man who rarely showed any emotion, was leaning forward, his eyes fixed on me. "Who the hell are you?" he asked. It wasn't an insult, it was a genuine question. "My name is Reed Prescott," I said. "I'm a logistics manager." He looked at my proposal on the screen, then back at me. A slow smile spread across his face. "No, son," he said, "you're not. You're my new head of global logistics. Make this happen." The promotion was announced the following week. Peterson was quietly reassigned to a satellite office in Alaska, and the acquisition of Nautical Necessities, the linchpin of my entire plan, was officially greenlit. It was now my project, my weapon. The trap was no longer just a blueprint. I was now actively building it, piece by meticulous piece. The hunter was in position, and the prey had no idea they were even being watched. As the new head of global logistics, the first major initiative I formally authorized was the acquisition of Nautical Necessities. From the outside, it was a simple, logical business transaction. Maritime Solutions, the industry giant, was absorbing a smaller regional player to consolidate its market position. It happened quietly, negotiated through a team of our M&A lawyers and their shell-shocked board of directors. My name, as the architect of the strategy, was kept internal. To the outside world, and to the clients of Nautical Necessities, this was just a faceless corporate takeover. The owner of Nautical Necessities was a man named Frank Miller. He was a 65-year-old, salt-of-the-earth type who had built his company from a single truck into a regional powerhouse, only to be undone by one poorly timed expansion. The deal forced him into a reluctant retirement. I knew from our background research that he was bitter, that he felt like a failure. He was the ghost of what my father could have been, if he'd had any grit. I needed to understand his operation, and more importantly, his customers. I couldn't rely solely on data, I needed the human intelligence. A week after the deal closed, I flew to his headquarters under the guise of overseeing the transition. I didn't walk in like a conquering CEO. I wore work boots, jeans, and a plain company polo shirt. Frank was expecting a slick executive in a suit. He was sitting in his office, a room cluttered with 30 years of maritime memorabilia, looking like a man condemned. "Mr. Miller," I said, extending a hand. "I'm Reed. I'm heading up the logistics integration for Maritime Solutions." He gave me a limp, suspicious handshake. "Come to pick over the bones, have you?" he grumbled. "No, sir," I replied. "I've come to learn. You built an impressive business. My spreadsheets can tell me what you sold, but they can't tell me how or why. I was hoping you'd be willing to show me around." My approach disarmed him. For the next 3 days, I wasn't his corporate conqueror. I was his apprentice. I walked his warehouse floors with him. I talked to his drivers. I asked him about his sourcing for specialty parts, about his relationships with port authorities, about the handshake deals he still honored. I didn't talk about synergy or optimization. I talked about bilge pumps and bottom paint. I showed him that I knew the dirt under the fingernails of this business. I respected what he had built. On the last day we were sitting in his office, sharing a bottle of whiskey he'd pulled from his bottom drawer. He was finally opening up, speaking with the weary candor of a defeated general. He started complaining about his most difficult clients. "You gotta watch out for some of these new money marina types," he warned, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "They think a fancy sign makes them royalty. Take Prescott Marine for example." I kept my expression perfectly neutral, a mask of polite interest. Inside, my entire body went on high alert. "Arrogant bunch," Frank continued, his voice thick with resentment. "The son Jonathan, he's a real piece of work, thinks he's the smartest guy in the room, always trying to squeeze you on price, demanding priority shipment on a Tuesday, and then taking 60 days to pay the invoice. Their old man was tough but fair, but this new generation, they got no respect. They rely on me, well, on this company now, for a few key parts. High-performance ignition systems for the racing boats they service, hard to source. I was the only distributor on the East Coast who had a reliable supply. They need those parts. Their whole high-end service reputation depends on it. They just don't know how much." He took a long swallow of whiskey. "My advice to you, Reed, put them on a short leash. Make 'em pay up front. They'll scream and yell, but at the end of the day they'll pay. They don't have a choice." He had just handed me the schematics to the bomb. It wasn't just about general supply, it was about specific, critical components. He had unknowingly confirmed their primary vulnerability. I thanked him for his time and his wisdom, assuring him that I would take his advice to heart. Back at my office in Port Harding, I set the first phase of the plan in motion. The initial communication to all former Nautical Necessities clients was a generic form letter from our M&A division. It was deliberately bland and bureaucratic. It announced the change in ownership and stated that all existing supply contracts and terms were under review. A representative from Maritime Solutions would be in contact in the coming weeks to establish new account protocols. It was designed to create uncertainty, a low-grade simmering anxiety. I could picture the scene at Prescott Marine perfectly. Jonathan would get the letter and scoff, a minor annoyance. He'd see it as an opportunity to flex his negotiating muscles, to bully some low-level account manager from a big corporation into giving him an even sweeter deal than he had with Frank. He'd feel powerful, in control. My father would tell him to handle it. My sister would start worrying about the new paperwork. My mother would be blissfully ignorant, planning the next yacht club social. They were so confident in their little kingdom, so insulated by their own arrogance. They had no idea that the storm wasn't just coming, it was being meticulously designed for them by me. The next step was to assign their new account manager. I chose a woman from my team named Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was in her late 40s, a veteran of the industry who had seen it all. She was professional, polite, and had a backbone of pure steel. She did not suffer fools, and she had a particular disdain for entitled clients who didn't pay their bills on time. I gave her a very specific set of instructions. "Sarah," I said, sliding the Prescott Marine file across my desk, "this is a new acquisition account. I want them moved to our standard corporate terms immediately. No exceptions." She flipped through the file, her eyes narrowing at Frank Miller's handwritten notes about late payments. "Standard terms, MSRP on all items, net 30 payment, and a credit hold for any invoice over 31 days. "Exactly," I said. "They're going to push back. They're going to threaten to leave. They're going to escalate. I want you to be polite, firm, and forward every single escalation request, no matter how trivial, directly to my office." A small knowing smile touched her lips. "Understood, Reed." I then went into our inventory management system. I found the high-performance ignition systems Frank had told me about. I flagged them. I didn't make them unavailable. That would be too obvious. I simply added a new logistics flag, subject to international supply chain verification. Any order for these specific parts would now trigger an automatic 2-week hold and require senior management approval to expedite. My approval. The squeeze was beginning. It was silent, invisible, buried in the gears of a corporate machine, 1,000 miles away. Prescott Marine was still operating as usual, their docks full, their customers happy. They were living in the last few moments of sunshine, completely unaware that I had just become their weather. The first drops of rain were about to fall. The first call came a week later. It was from Sarah. "Heads up, Reed," she said, her voice calm and professional. "I just had my introductory call with Jonathan Prescott. It went about as well as you predicted." "Let me guess," I said, leaning back in my chair. "He was charming at first, then condescending, and then he made a threat." "Bingo," she replied. "He tried to welcome us as his new partner, and immediately asked for a 10% discount across the board as a good faith gesture. When I informed him that all clients were being moved to standard MSRP, he was displeased. When I mentioned the net 30 payment terms, he actually laughed, said they had a special arrangement with Frank. I told him all special arrangements were now void. He ended the call by saying he'd be taking his very significant business elsewhere if we couldn't be more flexible. "And you told him?" I politely wished him the best of luck and reminded him that Maritime Solutions, through our various acquisitions, is now the sole North American distributor for 74% of the brands listed on his last 3 invoices. He hung up on me. I smiled. "Good work, Sarah. The next move is his." The next move came 2 days later, in the form of an order. It was a rush order for a dozen of the specialty ignition systems. A new racing boat had just come into their service bay, a major client. The order immediately triggered the hold I had placed in the system. Sarah called them back to inform them that due to new global supply chain protocols, there was an unfortunate but unavoidable 3-week lead time on those particular items. This time, Jonathan didn't just hang up. He exploded. I could hear him shouting through the phone in the background of the voicemail he left for Sarah, which she dutifully forwarded to me. It was a tirade of threats and insults, demanding to speak to her supervisor, her boss, the CEO, God himself if necessary. He was a man who had never been told no in his life, and he was completely baffled by it. The escalation emails started to flood in, first to Sarah's direct boss, who forwarded them to me, then to the General VP of Sales, who forwarded them to me. They were all addressed and CC'd to a dozen different people. A shotgun blast of outrage. Jonathan was trying to find a weak link, someone he could intimidate or charm, but every path, every chain of command, led to the same dead end, my desk. I let them simmer for a week. I instructed everyone to respond with a polite, standardized email. "Thank you for your inquiry. The matter has been escalated to our head of global logistics for review. We appreciate your patience as we transition all legacy accounts." The wall of corporate bureaucracy was impenetrable. They were firing cannons at a fortress, and I was the man in the central tower, watching their cannonballs bounce harmlessly off the walls. Then came the desperate counter-manipulation. Unable to get anywhere through official channels, they tried to find a backdoor. My father called Frank Miller. I know this because Frank called me. "Hey Reed," he said, a note of amusement in his voice. "Just got a strange call from Richard Prescott. Sounded like he was having a panic attack. Something about ignition systems, and his son being a hothead. He was trying to get me to pull some strings with the new guys. I told him I was just a retired old man now. Couldn't help him. Figured you'd want to know." "I appreciate that, Frank," I said. They were getting desperate. They were trying every angle they could think of, completely blind to the fact that all angles converged on me. The final phase began with their finances. Their first invoice under the new terms came due, net 30 days to the day. The morning of day 31, our automated system registered the invoice as unpaid. As per my instructions, an automatic credit hold was placed on their account. No new orders could be processed until the outstanding balance was paid in full. That afternoon, their service manager tried to place a routine order for 100 gallons of anti-fouling paint. The system rejected it. The panic at Prescott Marine must have been stratospheric. They weren't just being inconvenienced anymore. Their entire operation was grinding to a halt. They paid the initial invoice within the hour, a frantic wire transfer. But the damage was done. The message had been sent. We were not bluffing. They were trapped. Their business couldn't function without our supplies, and they couldn't get our supplies without adhering to our terms, the terms I had personally designed to bleed them slowly. Their profit margins would be sliced to ribbons. Their cash flow would be a constant panicked juggle. The proud, expanding legacy they had stolen my birthright to build was now on life support, and they didn't even know that the man with his finger on the plug was me. It was time to sign my name to their ruin. I sat down at my desk and pulled up the document I had spent a week perfecting with our legal team. It was titled, Permanent Terms of Business Agreement for Prescott Marine. It was cold, professional, and utterly brutal. It codified everything: the MSRP pricing, the net 30 payment schedule, the automatic credit holds. It added new stipulations, a requirement for a rolling credit check to maintain their account, and personal liability guarantees from the company officers for any orders over a certain amount. It was a contract no sane business would ever sign, unless they had a gun to their head. It was, in short, a document of total surrender. I printed it on the heavy, expensive bond paper our CEO used. I read it over one last time. It was perfect. I buzzed my assistant. "Jessica, could you come in here for a moment?" She came in, efficient and professional as always. "Yes, Mr. Prescott. Please prepare an overnight envelope to this address," I said, sliding her a sticky note with the address of Prescott Marine. "I want this letter to be the only thing in it." I picked up a pen, a heavy, black fountain pen that had been a gift from Mr. Harrison. The ink was dark, final. I uncapped it, and at the bottom of the page, above the typed line that read, "Sincerely, Reed Prescott, Head of Global Logistics, Maritime Solutions," I signed my name. The same name they had cast off and slandered, the same name they thought was synonymous with failure and weakness. Jessica took the letter. "It will go out with the afternoon courier, sir," she said. "It will be there by 10 a.m. tomorrow." "Thank you, Jessica," I said, turning my chair to face the window. "That will be all." I looked out at the harbor, at the peaceful bobbing boats. Tomorrow morning, a bomb would detonate in the offices of Prescott Marine, and my name would be on the fuse. The boy they had dismissed was about to become the man they could not survive. The return address on that envelope wasn't just a location in Port Harding, it was the endpoint of a 5-year journey through hell, and I was about to drag them all down into the fire with me. I can picture the scene as if I were a fly on the wall of the Marina office. The courier would arrive around mid-morning, a disruption to their usual routine of coffee and complaints. Cassie, always the one to handle the mail and the minutiae, would sign for the envelope. She'd feel the weight of it, the quality of the paper, and assume it was from a lawyer or an important new client. She would slit it open with a letter opener, her brow furrowed with curiosity. She'd unfold the letter, her eyes would scan the corporate letterhead, the dense, legalistic paragraphs. Then they would drop to the bottom of the page, to the signature, Reed Prescott. For a moment it wouldn't register. It would be a typo, a bizarre coincidence. She'd read the name again and again. Then her gaze would flick up to the title beneath it, Head of Global Logistics. The blood would drain from her face. It would be a slow, dawning horror, the kind that starts in your stomach and rises as cold, icy dread. She'd stand up, the letter trembling in her hand, and walk on unsteady legs into Jonathan's office. "Jonathan," she would stammer, her voice a reedy whisper, "you need to see this." He would be on the phone, probably bullying some poor vendor. He'd wave her off impatiently. "Not now, Cassie. I'm busy." "No," she'd insist, her voice cracking. "Now." He'd finally look at her, annoyed, and see the sheer terror in her eyes. He'd take the letter from her. He'd read it, his smug expression slowly melting away, replaced by a mask of pure, uncomprehending shock. He would read my name, and then he would connect the dots. The new supplier, the rigid terms, the blocked shipments, the bureaucratic stonewalling. It hadn't been random corporate policy. It had been targeted. It had been personal. It had been me. The phone call came at 10:17 a.m. I know the exact time because I was staring at the clock, waiting. Sarah patched him through directly to my private line. "This is Reed Prescott," I answered, my voice perfectly calm. "Reed." It was Jonathan. His voice was a choked, strangled thing, a mixture of incandescent rage and utter disbelief. "Reed, what is this? What in the hell is going on? This is some kind of sick joke, right?" "No joke, Jonathan," I said, the words cool and measured. "It's just business." "I believe that's the phrase you used." There was a sputtering sound on the other end of the line. He was speechless. For the first time in his life, my arrogant, always in control brother had no words. I could hear his ragged breathing. "How?" he finally managed to croak. You were a teacher. You disappeared." "I didn't disappear," I corrected him. "I went to work. While you were expanding your little kingdom, I was learning how a real empire functions. You see, you and Dad always thought the legacy was in owning the marina. You were wrong. The real power isn't in owning one boat. It's in controlling the parts for every boat on the coast. It's a lesson in logistics. You wouldn't understand." I threw his own words back at him like daggers, and I felt the satisfying thud as each one hit its mark. "You can't do this to us," he roared, finding his anger again. "We're your family." "My family?" I let out a short, cold laugh. "My family sold my soul for a new dock. My family built their future on the ashes of my past, and then told everyone I was too weak to handle it. You stopped being my family the day you slid that check across the coffee table." I heard a commotion, and then a new voice was on the line. It was my mother. "Reed, honey, what are you doing? Please, son, stop this. This is your family's legacy you're destroying." The term honeys felt so alien, so manipulative. "My legacy was a house by the sea, and you sold it," I said, my voice dropping to an icy whisper. "The business, this marina, this is your legacy, a legacy of greed. You're confusing it with mine. I'm just the bill coming due for its construction." She started to cry, the soft, pleading sobs that had always worked on me before. This time, I felt nothing. That part of me, the part that could be wounded by her tears, was a crater. It was dead tissue. Then my father was on the phone, his voice blustering with false authority. "Now you listen here, Reed. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but we will not be bullied. We'll sue. We'll take our business elsewhere. We'll tell everyone what you're doing." "Go ahead," I said, my voice flat. "Who will you tell? The boating community? The one that depends on maritime solutions for 70% of its parts? You can't go elsewhere, Dad, because I've bought elsewhere. As for suing me, I invite you to try. Every term in that agreement has been vetted by a legal team that costs more per hour than your entire marina makes in a month. They are, as they say, airtight." I let the silence hang in the air for a moment before delivering the final blow. "You have two choices," I stated, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Option 1. You sign the agreement as is. You will operate on the razor-thin margins I have designed for you. You will pay every invoice on time, to the penny. You will be a model client. Your business will survive, but it will be a shadow of what you dreamed, and it will be entirely under my control. Option 2. You refuse to sign. If that agreement is not signed and returned to my office within 48 hours, your account with Maritime Solutions and all of its subsidiaries will be permanently terminated. Your supply chain will be severed. You'll be in breach of contract with every boat owner in your slips. You will be bankrupt within 6 months." I paused. "The choice is yours. Welcome to the new reality." I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need one. I gently placed the receiver back in its cradle, cutting off the sound of my father's sputtering rage. It was over. The 5 years of silence, of relentless work, of cold, simmering fury, had all led to this single quiet moment of absolute victory. I had not only beaten them at their own game, I had become the game itself. 2 days later, an email from Sarah landed in my inbox. The subject line was simple: "It's done." Attached was a PDF scan of the permanent terms of business agreement. It was signed and initialed on every page. The signatures of my father, my brother, and my sister were shaky, like the scrawls of prisoners signing a confession. They had surrendered, unconditionally. The first wire transfer for an outstanding invoice, under the new, unforgiving terms, arrived in our account an hour later. It was for the exact amount, down to the last cent. I didn't feel a surge of elation or a rush of triumphant joy. That's not what this was about. Instead, a profound quiet settled over me. It was the silence I had been chasing for 5 years, the constant grinding noise in my head, the whispers of their condescension, the shouts of their betrayal, the echoes of my own perceived inadequacy, was finally gone. In its place was a calm, cold satisfaction, the kind a craftsman feels when a complex and difficult job is finally complete. I leaned back in my chair and looked out my window at the harbor. The sun was glinting off the water, and the boats were sailing freely. My life was my own, built by my own hands, on my own terms. I hadn't just reclaimed my narrative, I had forged an entirely new one. The underestimated son was a ghost, a fiction they had created. The man sitting in this chair was real. David Chen knocked on my doorframe and walked in, holding a tablet. "Read. I've got the initial Q3 projections based on the new freight consolidation out of the Singapore hub," he said, his eyes bright with excitement. "You're not going to believe these efficiency gains." I turned from the window and smiled, a genuine smile. "Let's see them," I said. And just like that, we were back to work. Building, not destroying. My focus was on the future, a future I had secured for myself. My family thought they had buried me when they sold that house. They thought the story of my failure was the final chapter. They didn't understand. They weren't burying me. They were planting a seed in the dark, fertile ground of betrayal, and they watered it with their arrogance and their gossip, never realizing what they were helping to grow. They underestimated me. That was their first mistake. Their last mistake was believing that I would ever forget. They spent 5 years talking about my diminished life, while I was quietly building the machine that would one day control their fate. They wanted a legacy built on money and shiny things. A legacy they could see and brag about at the yacht club. I'll stick with the one my grandfather gave me, a love for the sea, a respect for honest work, and the quiet confidence of a man who knows his own worth. A person's value isn't determined by the opinions of those who look down on them. It's forged in the lonely hours, measured by what you build when no one is watching. So I'll ask you, what do you think? Did I go too far, or did my family get the precise calculated dose of karma they had earned? Let me know what you would have done in my position down in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories about the underestimated finally getting their due, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because the world is full of people like my family, and justice, like the tide, always comes in.